Uh, Suraj, my screen is visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Suraj. Good evening again. Good evening to all of you. On behalf of Envis Resource Partner on Avian Ecology at the Bombay Natural History Society and Envis Center for Environmental Studies, that is CES, Forest and Environment Department, Government of Odisha. I welcome you all. I, Nan Kishore Dude, working as a program officer at BNHS Envis, will be your humble host for the today's event. Dear participants, I would like to add that your active participation is important throughout the session. I would request everyone to be mute in order to avoid any noise, any background noise. So please mute your mic. You may enter your questions in chat box at the end of the session. We will open the chat box at the end of the session. That time you can add your questions. So our speaker will give the answer. Before going further, I would like to give introduction about Ek Bharat Shrestha Bharat program. The Ek Bharat Shrestha Bharat program is based on the idea of sustained and structured cultural connect between people of different regions residing in India. This idea was propounded by Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi during the Rashtriya Ekta Divas held on 31st October 2015. This program considered the pairing of different states and union territories in order to promote mutual understanding between people and establish cultural exchange for further human bonding of our nation building. As this year Maharashtra has been paired with Odisha, the Envis center of both these states will be contributing towards the celebration of this event. The environmental information system collates and disseminate information and various knowledge product on different environment related thematic areas and generate awareness amongst the stakeholders via the Envis Hub and resource partner, which are hosted in the environment, forest department of state government, union territories, administrations, and environment related government and non-government organizations. Thus, the Ek Bharat Shrestha Bharat program has been included in the Envis awareness and outreach program for a wide circulating for the wide circulation for creating public awareness and promotion of our cultural integration. On this account, the Envis Resource Partner on Avian Ecology at Bombay Natural History Society and Envis Center for Environmental Studies at the Forest and Environment Department of Government of Odisha are jointly organizing an online webinar on the topic bird migration and study technique. This webinar will be delivered by Ms. Tuhina Katti. So welcome Ms. Tuhina Katti. About today's speaker, Ms. Tuhina Katti. She is working as a scientist bee at wetland program of BNHS. She is involved in bird migration studies for the past 8 years, of which she has spent around 3 years at Bird Migration Study Center, which is based in Point Calimar, Tamil Nadu. Currently, she is part of the team that is working towards conserving major migratory waterbird sites in India. She is a ringing nodal officer at BNHS. She has completed course on ecology and conservation of migratory birds at Smithsonian and field of interest in bird molds. So
Thank you,
about our
Nandakishore.
Envis Center, as you know, we are conducting this program jointly. So Envis Resource Partner on Avian Ecology, which is based at Bombay Natural History Society, was established in 1996. This program is supported by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Uh, the main objective of this Envis Center to collect the avian ecology related information, and this information we have provide to the policymakers, scientists, engineers, research workers all over India. In major objectives to publish Buceros, which is a newsletter. And these buceros are really helpful for the bird watcher, mostly the amateur bird watcher, those who know more about the particular species or the particular area where you will get a large number of birds. Then recently we have started green skill development program. Last 2 years we are doing this green skill development program. In 2019-20, we have successfully completed 4 GSDP certificate courses. One is key biodiversity area, second is people biodiversity registered, third one bird migration study, and fourth one bird trapping. So out of 4 GSDP courses, we have trained around 73 youth. All they are unemployed, and out of that, around 10 youth got the job. This is the uh, achievement of our course. I would like to invite Mr. Pravat Mohan Das. He is a program officer of Center for Environment Studies to talk about his Envis Center. Pravat sir, are you available? Hello, Pravat sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, sir.
That was network issue. I could not join immediately. So,
Okay.
thank you and good evening to everyone. And it's a nice topic today. As Mr. Nand Kishore said, we are the under NV scheme. There are about 69 centers throughout the country, and
Hello, Pravat sir. Your voice is breaking. Hello, Pravat sir.
yes, many students are in different reputed institutions now, and under this Shrestha Bharat, Ek Bharat Shrestha Bharat, Ministry has assigned to conduct some seminars like webinars and other awareness activities. And just like we have already completed 2 webinars, and this is the third webinar jointly with Bombay Natural History Society. And for the new who are new to the NVs, one suggestion I would like to say, you just try in Google that any data related to environment, you just put in the Google search. Definitely, there will be some source from NVs, and on priority basis, first or second, you will find NV centers data. So this is because we are collecting this information since last 20 years or more than that. Some centers are also functioning since 1982. So in this way, we are 69 centers under one family, NVs. So let me now, without wasting time, I would like to request Mr. Anand Kishore to proceed and to invite our two test speakers.
Okay. Thank you, Pravat sir. Without further delay, I will like to request Miss Tuhina Katti, please start the presentation.
Thank you, Nandakishore and Pravat sir. I'll just share my presentation. I hope it's visible.
Yes, yes, it's visible.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. Hope most of you are safe and in a good condition right now. That's the need of the hour. So I am Tuhina Katti, as Nandkishore sir mentioned. I am a scientist in the wetlands program of PNHS, which works towards conserving major migratory waterbird habitats in India. And today I will be talking about different bird migration study techniques that are used worldwide and more so in India to really understand how migration works. 1 second. I think the sharing. Kishore, my sharing is not going through. Is it visible now?
Yes, it is visible now.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so like I was mentioning, it is about understanding how birds migrate, and I will be talking about the study techniques that are used worldwide to really understand how and when birds move around these different places, which are thousands of kilometers apart, and what are the stress factors, what do they go through, and how do we really understand them better. So first, I'll start off with a very recent information that we got on a common crane that was jointly linked with the Wildlife Institute of India, Power Grid, and Government of Gujarat, where they had put a tracker on a common crane, and they were successfully able to track its way all the way from Gujarat, where they ringed it when they tagged it in March 2020 last year, all the way up to Kazakhstan, where the bird was breeding. And in 2020 winter, the bird came back to the same site again. And this year again, it's on its journey back to the breeding grounds. So this was an interesting study that has just come out a couple of weeks back. The next, another interesting from India is of the Amur falcon. Most of us must be aware of the bird that travels from northern China all the way to South Africa, crossing India, where it spends some time in Nagaland and Manipur, and almost more than 10,000 or even lakhs of them stop at a certain place, refuel, and then they commence their journey back. And on the way back, they can also be seen in Gujarat and Maharashtra. Okay. Another one that is very interesting, and I will also be covering it later, is of a bar-tailed godwit. So this is not from India, but a very interesting study where a bird tagged in New Zealand traveled all the way to its breeding site in Alaska. And in the next year, when it was supposed to come down to its wintering site in New Zealand again, it traveled almost more than 11,000 kilometers non-stop without stopping anywhere in 9 days straight. So it was an interesting record, and this species itself broke its own record where it traveled more than 12,000 kilometers recently. And another one, another very interesting is of an Arctic tern, where it traveled from almost from North Pole all the way down to Antarctica, and covers a journey of 60 to 70,000 kilometers every single year during its migration pathway. Uh, So yeah, so this is what we would be studying about. We'll be understanding how we track migration. But before we do all of that, we want to understand why exactly. Wait a second. Someone's requesting for annotation request. So just to give you an idea of how.
Please ignore this annotation.
Okay. Uh, just to give you an idea of how migration really works in long distance migratory water birds specifically, what they do is they breed during May to June when they have summers in the northern hemisphere. So they will lay their eggs, hatch chicks, feed them, and after they're done with that, by August they will start moving southwards to a little warmer climates, because as winter starts approaching in the northern hemisphere, the birds start moving down. Like I mentioned with the bar-tailed godwit, as the bird traveled non-stop for 10 to 11,000 kilometers, that is not the case in most of the birds. So most of the birds require small staging sites or stopovers on the way, because it is not practically possible for most species to travel that distance non-stop. It requires a lot of energy and fat. So a lot of birds just keep stopping over at different sites, and these little sites also become a very crucial link for their migratory pathway, because if we lose these sites, they will not be able to complete their migratory journey. So from August to October, the birds are traveling down towards their wintering site. That's where they will be spending their entire winter. From November to February is where they will be stable at a certain site, or just do very small local movements. And this is the wintering area, so they will spend almost 4 to 5 months in these sites. They will feed voraciously in these areas. They will molt. I will talk about molt later. They will molt their feathers, uh, come up with fresh new feathers to continue their journey, put on enough fat so that they can start their migratory journey back in early summer. And by March to April, they'll start their journey back to the breeding grounds. And during this time, not only do they have to complete their molt, they'll have to have a fresh set of feathers. They would have to have enough fat reserves to complete their journey, and also reach on time so that they can mark a territory and have a successful breeding in the coming year. So, when I'm saying we will be talking about tracking birds, we need to understand why we need to track birds. It's not just about knowing where all they go, but there's a lot more that goes into studying bird migration. It's either for academic interest or for conservation studies. So one is understanding where the breeding and wintering locations are, what are the sites that the birds use, which are the sites which are very, very important for those birds in their migratory journey. Like I mentioned, with the breeding and wintering, the small stopover sites where the bird stops, they're just as important. And then the connectivity between these sites. So how long do they stop at each site, and how do they use that site? The next is energy uses physiology. How much energy do they need? So if there is a bird that travels maybe only 200 kilometers during its entire migratory journey, it will need different kind of energy and different level of energy, comparing it to a bird that travels almost 10,000 kilometers. So it is about understanding how they use their energy and how they store their energy, and hormones and gut microbiome. So let's say a bird is feeding during its breeding time in Russia, and the same bird, while it comes to winter in India, it will feed in the Indian wintering ground. So the food available at both of these places will be completely different, but its digestive system will have to synthesize both the available nutrients. So there are some birds which are carnivorous during a certain part of their migratory journey and herbivorous during a certain part of their migratory journey. It's about understanding how they do that too. Then another important thing that we're all aware of is disease spreading. So we are all aware of avian influenza and a lot of other avian botulism and other diseases that are spread from long distance migratory birds also. So in case we have any diseases that are spreading in a certain area, it helps us to understand what is the migratory pathway of the birds that are arriving there, so we can actually trace back the disease spread of those areas, and we can take mitigating actions. There are carryover effects, like I said. So if a certain area, let's say a bird that's coming to wintering site in India, maybe let's say Chilika Lake or some place in Mumbai, and if it does not get good quality food, or if there are a lot of chemicals in the food, the effects may not be visible at that point immediately, but when it goes back to its breeding ground, it may not be able to breed as successfully because of the effect of the chemicals that have been ingested. And these are carryover effects. Along with that, we'll also have to understand a lot about their navigation, how they navigate, how they use a territory at a certain space. Do they need a very small territory? Do they need a territory of multiple wetlands? And how they require that habitat to complete the migratory journey. Okay, I'm just going to read it out. Miss Suman Maharana is requesting for annotation request continuously, so it's a little disturbing. Can you just make sure you don't do that? The next thing that we will start with is when I talk about bird navigation techniques. So if a bird is traveling thousands of kilometers from one place to another, how does it really know where to go? Or I mean, I'm sure it doesn't have any maps with it. So the most commonly known navigation techniques are the sun compass. It travels according to the. Sorry, someone saying something?
No, please continue.
Okay. With the sun compass, the position of the sun, then the star compass, like a lot of our navigators use for traveling across the seas, the constellations and star compass. Along with that, they also use an odor map. Basically, that's a map of smells of each place. So, a coastal area, a mountainous area, a grassland, every place has a very distinct smell. And these birds have almost a map of all of these odors, and they can trace their route based on these odors. Along with that, there is a magnetic compass. So, they have a protein in their eye with the help of which they can actually navigate with the help of the Earth's north and south magnetism. And along with that, another very interesting thing is the genetic imprinting. So the entire route or the journey is imprinted in their genes. So for a lot of species, when a chick is born, after it fledges out of the nest, the parents will leave for migratory journey, and the chick or the first year bird will continue the migratory journey on their own. So they may not be assisted by the parents. The chick will do their journey on their own. That is also because the entire route is genetically imprinted, and they know it because it is in their genes. Along with that, another interesting thing is not all birds move during the day. Some use the night because it's safer, there are lesser predators, it's not as hot, the conditions are more favorable. Other birds use the day because then they can keep stopping at different places, feeding on the way, and keep continuing their journey throughout the day and stop somewhere at night. And then there are some birds, such as birds of prey or storks or cranes, which use the heat currents during the middle of the day. And with the help of those heat currents, they can actually travel much faster and cover a long distance than the other smaller birds. So that's how we go about it. So now coming directly to the study techniques. These are the study techniques which are commonly used all around the world. So I will be covering some of them. First one is bird ringing studies. It's the most conventional study all over the world, not just in India. It's a study technique where you put a metal ring on a bird's leg. So I'll just zoom in a little bit. Here you can see on the bird's leg, there's a metal ring and there's a specific engraving. So every ring has a serial number which is not repeated at all, and that number becomes the identity of the bird. So here you can see also, here you can see the number is 2811. Here the number is okay, let's not get into it. So this ring is put, it's a very lightweight, non-corrosive ring that is put on the birds. And
Ma'am, पानी देना.
Acha, please mute yourself. This ring then becomes the identity of that bird, and it is a very long lasting ring. So there have been records of rings being recovered on birds after 60, 70, 80 years also. So that's how long they can last. And talking about how bird ringing has really helped us, because it's a topic of bird ringing, I think it's interesting that we have a center in Chilika itself, in Chilika Lake. BNHS has a center, and they have done a lot of ringing studies. And from those ringing studies, we've got a lot of recoveries which have helped us identify the connectivity patterns and the migratory routes of several birds. So bird ringing really started in India in 1927 on a small scale, and from 1959 when is when a long-term large-scale bird ringing has been carried out in India. This ringing has given us data on longevity, which is the lifespan of birds. Which is the lifespan of birds. So we were able to understand how long they live. Site fidelity is if they keep coming back to the same wintering or breeding sites again and again, or if they use different sites, we've gotten information on that, and the migratory routes and connectivity. These recoveries have also helped us mark the boundaries of major flyways that India is a part of, and the birds that were ringed in India have been recovered from 29 countries and over 5 continents. So that's the extent of birds coming to India. So what are the pros and cons of bird ringing? One majorly is that it's comparatively inexpensive. It's not as expensive as a lot of devices are. It is very lightweight and it is durable. The only problem with ringing is that once you ring a bird and release it, you will not get any information unless you get the ringed bird back. So once you recapture the bird with a ring and read the ring number, that is when you'll understand how, a lot of data on longevity or the movement. But you need to recapture the bird, and you only get point-to-point connectivity data. So you will not get a lot of data like I mentioned on physiology or hormones or space use. For that, you will need another technique. And you need a large manpower and a series of ringing stations. Even though that is the case, ringing still remains to be the most popular and the most preferred migration study method, because you get a lot of data on morphometry of a bird, and maybe not in the Central Asian part, but all over the world, there is a very wide network of ringers. And from that, there's a very nice network of data sharing that happens between all of these ringers. So we get a lot of information through ringing. So most of our information about migration still comes from ringing. So what are these rings? So you just have to understand, based on the species, you need to understand you need to know the size of the ring and the type of a ring. So you can use aluminum ring for some species which are very aggressive, and uh, they need steel rings for birds that are completely marine and they do not come on land, and there is a higher chance of corrosion. They will need an ink alloy ring. So different kinds of rings, different sizes of rings are available. One needs to know what is the purpose and what is the species and its life history a little bit. So once we ring a bird, what we do is we also collect a lot of data on the morphometry. So we collect information on its bill length. If it's relevant, we collect information on the head size, the tail length, the tarsus length, the wing length. All of this helps us identify which population comes to a certain site. If there are subpopulations, it is helpful in identifying which subpopulation comes to a certain site. Along with that, we also take data on a brood patch. So data on brood patch helps us identify if the bird had recently been actively breeding, or if it is inactive at that breeding site. So this is more relevant in and around breeding sites, not at the wintering site. And another very important and interesting data that needs to be collected while we are ringing is mold. So like we know that snakes mold their skin, uh, birds need to mold their feathers also. They need to do this because if a bird is going to continue a journey of, let's say, thousands of kilometers, the feathers are going to face a lot of wear and tear. They're not going to be in the greatest condition. And if the bird keeps flying with these worn out feathers, first of all, it's not going to be a very efficient flight and it will need much more energy. So I will just zoom in and show you a bird that has just recently finished a part of his journey. Will have feathers that look like this. And then from inside, you can see the new renewed feathers, which are in perfect condition, that are growing. So these are called molting patterns. So this is a flight feather mold that we take. So here you can see tail and wings are molting. So you see older feathers also, you see newer feathers also. And based on this, we take data on the duration of mold, how the bird is molting, because mold is one of a very energy consuming practice in a bird's lifespan. So it has to complete its mold, but it has to do it in a certain time, which it does not coincide with either migration or breeding. And at the same time, it has to make sure it is getting in good quality and enough feed so that it can generate good quality feathers. So the kind of mold that the bird is undergoing gives us a lot of clues about the habitat that the bird is in right now. So if the bird is not able to complete its molt or the feathers are of bad quality, it is an indication that the habitat that it's using or the site where we are studying, it is not providing good quality of feeding potential to that bird. So this is the information that we also collect while ringing. And the main information that we get while doing all of this is the recoveries. So when a bird, you ring a bird, you release it, and then you trap it again, like somebody else traps it in another site, and you understand how the bird is moving. So here you can again see it is a northern pintail, a bird which is again quite a common duck in Maharashtra and Orissa. So from the recoveries of this duck, you can understand what has been the movement pattern. So you can see this S-shaped pattern of its recoveries, and that's how we understood how the bird was moving. And first of all, you get information on where all it was recorded, and then we also plotted based on seasons. So if a bird was using the site while it was coming down to its wintering area, or it's using those sites while it's going back to a certain area. So this is important so that we can tell the people involved in those areas. So let's say if we get a lot of recoveries from Kazakhstan, we can't just simply tell them that you need to conserve these sites throughout the year. You also need to tell them that it is important that you conserve these sites between March and May, or between August and October, to make the conservation effort very efficient. So you get information on the seasonality of birds, the extent of its movement. This is the major information that we get from the recovery. So I'll just share a couple of other interesting recoveries. So this is a curlew sandpiper, again a common bird, a common shore bird from Orissa and Maharashtra. And you can see that the bird is ringed here in, in southern coast of India, was recovered all the way from the Arctic coast, so from its breeding ground, and during its winter it was also recovered from Australia. So in for some birds, maybe a subpopulation, India is just a stopover site. So it will just come to Indian coast, it will refuel and then go all the way down to Australia to spend its winters. So this is the information that we came to know. Another interesting recovery is of a pelagic bird which is called a South Polar skua, which was ringed all the way in Antarctica and recovered along the coast of India. And the next one is our humble house sparrow, a bird that for a long time we always considered to be a resident bird. But turns out a few birds ringed in Bharatpur were eventually even recovered in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan. Along with that, we also had a recovery of a Delhi bird, a bird ringed in Delhi in Kazakhstan, and a bird ringed in Tamil Nadu all the way in Bangladesh. From this, we understood that there could be a population of house sparrows that have the capacity to do long distance migrations also. So after this, we move to the next uh, study technique, which is color bands. So like I mentioned, the limitation with rings was it was always necessary that somebody else at the other part of the world should recover your bird and report the ring details to you. To get rid of that problem, what the world started doing was the use of color bands. So you can see here a lot of different color bands are used along with the rings. So even if you're using color bands, rings are still used for these birds, and different combinations. So here you have birds for which we've put a color band on a flamingo, and there is also an engraving. So that how that helps us is a lot of bird watchers or photographers can actually see these birds from the binoculars or cameras and report these to us. So then there is no need for that bird to be recaptured to get information on its movement. So these are the different types of color bands that are used for different species based on their habitat, based on their habits and their sizes. So these are the different color tags. So you see here on the left are wing tags, and the ones on the right are neck collars that are used for bar-headed goose. So how do we decide what color tags to use? We can't simply start using the colors that we are fond of. When we start using these color tags, we have to make sure that there is no overlap. So if I'm using a certain color, no other country or a region should be using that same color, because then it will cause confusion if a bird watcher sees it. For this, you have to communicate it with the flyway people or the people working on those species and come up with a system where there is no overlap. So in India, we're using two combinations. In northern India, we're using double white color flags, and in southern India, we're using single black color flag, which is in accordance to the East Asian Australasian Flyway shorebird flagging protocol. So you have to follow those protocols also. We cannot use any other colors. Similar is the case for a lot of other birds. You have to use it based on the protocol itself. These resightings, so once you put these color bands or color tags on these birds, the subsequent resightings that we get from bird watchers or photographers gives us information of when the bird arrived at a certain site, how long it stayed, what was the pattern, if two or three birds were in together from a certain flock, were they also seen together? So that gives us information of the site fidelity, the seasonality, and the flock fidelity. Flock fidelity is when birds tend to stay in the same flock year after year. So this is the information, and these are different types of tag color bands that are used all over the world. We are not using them in India, so we do not use a nasal saddle or a wing tag. We use color bands, neck collars, and leg flags only. So in the recent years, we've been getting a lot of these resighting records, and they have helped us identify a lot of migratory patterns also. And one of them also has been bar-headed goose, for which we use neck collars. So here you can see there are bar-headed geese with red neck collars, which is the color code for India. And in the middle picture, you can see a bar-headed goose with green neck collar, and that is the combination that Mongolia is using. So if you see a green neck collared bird, immediately you'll know that the bird is from Mongolia. And you can communicate the details, and they will tell you when it was ringed and where it was ringed. So as I mentioned, we've been getting a lot of resightings from bird watchers and photographers in the past few years, and it has always been very helpful. So we've been able to understand a lot more about migration with their help. Now, after that, we're moving to devices. So again, the limitation with ringing was that it had to be recaptured. A limitation with a color band is it has to be resighted by somebody else. So if nobody records a bird anywhere else, we have no chance of knowing how it moves. To get rid of that, devices are very helpful. So you can actually just put a device on a bird and leave it, and you will keep getting information on how it is moving. Though it is not very easy to simply put a device, because you have to understand the weight of the device and the attachment. Any device has to be less than 3% of the bird's body weight. Then you have to place it in such a way that it does not cause any hindrance to the bird when it's carrying out its migration or during its life cycle. So it cannot hinder the bird, maybe for breeding or any other activity, or it should not be very visible from predators. Another thing is you have to understand what kind of attachment technique that you have to use. So if you have to mount it on its back, on its neck, and with a thin wire, with the help of a leg band, so all of that is very necessary, because if these go wrong, there are chances that not only will your device malfunction, but you also have a chance of losing the bird's life, because that is always going to hinder with its movement. So one has to be very mindful of it. The first one is a VHF radio transmitter. These are the most common transmitters which have a handheld antenna. And in previous times, these are the types of tags that were also used to track big mammals. So you used to put a tracker on a mammal and you could track it with the help of an antenna. So the VHF transmitters are very small transmitters which you can put on smaller birds also, but you do not get data on long distance migration. You can only get data on its territoriality, local movement, and how it's using a small space. So it is only good for territoriality studies in migration. The next is a light level geolocator. So also a very small device which can be put on birds. What it basically does is it takes the light that is falling on the device as a cue of its location. So it takes the sunrise and sunset hours based on the duration of light that it's getting, and the peak sunlight based on the highest sunlight that it gets, and based on that it calculates the location of the bird. This is not a very accurate one, so it's not like how you're using your GPS, but it is helpful for long distance migratory birds. So you cannot, like in the previous one, you could only study short distance. In this, you can only understand long distance. You are not going to get any valuable data on the short distance movement. So only when the distance is in thousands of kilometers, then it is relevant, because it is not very crisp quality data. Another problem with a geolocator is you cannot keep getting data. You have, once you put the device on the bird, you have to retrap the bird the next year, get the device back, and only then can you start getting your data. So to put a device on this bird, you need to know the site fidelity that I mentioned. So the bird needs to keep coming back to the same site again and again, only then do you get your data. So this was one study where they studied rose finches that are coming to India with the help of a geolocator. And like I previously mentioned, an Arctic tern which covers 60 to 70,000 kilometers in 1 year, that was also studied based on the geolocator data, and they did this at the breeding site. So because they have the same breeding site every year, the birds were tagged at the breeding site, and next year when they came for breeding, they took the device out and analyzed the data. So it's a very complex analysis, but it gives you good data for long distance birds. Next one is a GSM GPS transmitter. So in the first slide of the presentation, when I mentioned about the common crane, so that again is the GSM GPS transmitter. So it basically works in a very similar fashion that our phones work. What it has is a small GPS device, a GPS in the device, which collects the location information and also a GSM component, which is like the SIM card of our phone, which transmits data to the closest mobile tower. And from that, we are able to understand where the bird exactly is and how it is moving based on the network of the existing mobile tower. So it does not need any other transmitting network that we have to come up with. So it gives you data on local movement, like how you can see out here in yellow. It gives you data on local movement. It also gives you data on long distance movement. So this was a bird that traveled all the way down to Africa, and that was understood from the GSM GPS transmitter that was put on the bird. Unfortunately, the bird was killed at a site in Africa, and the poacher ended up taking out the GSM SIM card and made a lot of international calls, which eventually the institution had to pay for. But this is just another part. This is not a very common thing. So like I mentioned, it gives you a small scale data also. It gives you a long distance data also. It also tells you the height and the pattern of terrain use. So if it was a very high flying the ground itself, that is also the information that you can get from a GSM GPS transmitter. The major drawback is it is a big device. You cannot use it on smaller birds. You can only use it on larger birds. And then there is satellite tracking. Satellite tracking again is a very famous and a very preferred technique for larger birds, because you cannot use it on smaller birds at all. It can actually give you real-time tracking. So you can keep getting information on where your bird is exactly at that moment. It is very accurate, and there are no limitations on where the bird, the device can track. So you can track all over the world. You do not need to recapture the bird, and it is solar powered. So the battery keeps getting charged with the help of its solar power. The drawback, of course, it is extremely expensive. So you cannot really risk putting it on several species. It does not also have a very good rate of success. So there are high chances that you put a device on a bird and it may not work. So if a bird prefers to be in shade, the solar charger will not get charged and you will not get your information. Along with that, if it is a diving bird, there are chances that that might malfunction the device also. A lot of things can go wrong. So one has to be very mindful because it's an extremely, I think it costs close to 5 lakhs a year to get your data. With the device and the transmission, it will cost around 5 lakhs. And it is not suitable for smaller size birds. So you can only use it on larger birds. Again, initially how I mentioned about the bar-tailed godwit, where they studied that it traveled non-stop for 11,000 kilometers. It was using this technique. We also have interesting information on common cuckoos that come all the way from China, cross India, and go to Africa and take the same similar route back. So this was also studied through satellite transmitters. And not only do you understand the entire migratory route, you also understand where all it was stopping throughout the journey. So this is the small scale data, and what you saw previously was the long distance data. So using this study, we have also studied bar-headed coos in India. So here you can see the ones marked in blue are the individuals that were tagged in near Kanyakumari. Then the ones in red are the ones that were tagged in Chilika Lake, and the ones in green were tagged in Pong Dam in Himachal Pradesh. So all of these were tracked throughout the migratory journey all the way to their breeding ground, and the black spots are where the birds kept stopping during the journey. So you can see the blue ones, which are the southernmost, were all the way up north to Mongolia. The Chilika ones went to China to different breeding grounds, and the Himachal ones went to Tibet to the closest breeding grounds. So from here, we could actually identify where all the birds were stopping based on the black dots. And we could also know that the birds from southern India and from Chilika were using the same stopovers out here in near Bhutan, where they would spend time together and then disperse again, and they would go to the respective breeding grounds. So that made these sites near Bhutan India border very important for migratory birds. That is something that we also understood. After this, we come to the most relevant data for migration that has come up in recent years, and a lot of data has been coming through citizen science data. So when you put in your photos in different platforms, bird-related platforms, they finally collate all the data and help us understand how migration really happens. So Oriental Bird Club image, based on the locations and the molds and the breeding patterns and the timings, one could actually identify if a bird was using that site during a wintering area, a stopover, or breeding. And then there is eBird, so which is almost the most common platform where you can record all of your bird related information, your bird sightings. And when a lot of bird watchers report their sightings to eBird, what happens is, based on all of your location information, your season information, and your counts, they have recently come up with beautiful maps that can actually tell us how the records change based on every season, and that could predict the movement of these birds. So yeah, so this is the map where you can see based on the months, you can see the months below from January to December, and how these birds, especially rosy starlings, come to India and then disperse, go back to their breeding sites, and then come back to India in winters again. So these are the beautiful maps that were created by Bird Count India and eBird India. So this is how citizen science can play a major role in understanding how migration works. So based on that, you can always log in your bird sightings in eBird. And if you ever happen to see a tagged bird, any bird with a ring, a device, or a color band, how do you go about it? How do you understand where the bird has come from? So for that, you can log into BNHS website. And on that, there is a tab called as Report a Tagged Bird. So you can simply click on it, and you will have two options. You can download a form, or there is an application where you can fill the information. You just download the form and send the details to bands@bnhs.org. You get this information in the form. And once you submit all the relevant information, we share it with the ringer and get back to you with the ringing details of where the bird was ringed, if there is any information about the previous resightings, or if there is any other information on the movement of the bird. So that's how we communicate back to you about the migration of that bird. So with that, yeah, so these are the forms and the application that you can use to report those tagged birds and help out in understanding migration. With that, I end my talk, and if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box.
Thank you, Torina, for your wonderful presentation. I'm sure our participants have thoroughly enjoyed and gained useful information regarding various study techniques required to assess bird migration through this visually pleasing session. I request all the participants to please provide with a feedback for this session via the link which has been provided in the chat box. Now I will commence with the question and answer session. And regarding that, Tuina, just let me know when you're ready to take the questions.
I'm ready whenever you are.
Okay, so I request all the participants to post their questions in the chat box or in the question answer box. Yeah, the first question is from Mohak Bhatnagar. He asks that does tagging the birds affect them in any way? Also, how does climate affect the data during migration?
Okay, I have a very important answer. We make sure that we tag birds based on an understanding of previous tagging experiences. Bird ringing usually does not seem to affect a bird in their life history or their movement pattern because it's a very non-intrusive small device. Uh, for a couple of land bird species was it noticed that color banding was actually affecting the sexual selection. So when that was seen, uh, we stop using a certain method. For devices I mentioned, one has to understand the biology and the life history of that bird. And if it is visible that any certain device or any technology is hampering their movement pattern or their life, then we try avoiding using that technique. That said, though, there have been studies from Australia, I think, where they mentioned that using a device on a bird causes a certain level of stress, and there are chances that it may deviate from its original migratory route. So that's why we are very mindful of using devices. And about climate change, as you mentioned, more than climate change, currently that's a long-term data. Of course, it is affecting not just that movement, but also how and where they're breeding, the predation pressure that they are facing while doing that, because the timings are very less. They need nice cold timings for their breeding at certain areas, and they're not getting that. So of course climate change is also affecting, but land use change is affecting them much more than climate change in the current scenario, because we don't have a very clear understanding of how climate change is really affecting them, because the birds are adapting in that way.
Okay. The next question is from Vivek Vishwas Joshi. He asks that how challenging it is to capture bird to ring and then again recapture to get details.
So most of our recaptures happen not from our short ringing expeditions, but from our ringing stations. That's why we prefer setting up a ringing station like how we have in Tamil Nadu. We have one even in Mumbai and one in Chilika Lake also. There are others also run certain centers, but it is very challenging. So I mean, even capturing a certain bird is not very easy, and then having to recapture the bird is another challenge in itself. So we prefer doing it at ringing stations itself. So I think the recapture rate is less than 1%. So that's the kind of data that we get. You have to ring a lot of birds, only then do you get little information.
Okay. Next question is from Venki Krishnan. He asks that could you share the name of the app again to record?
It's on BNHS website. It is called Bands app. It is not on Play Store, unfortunately. But you can go to the BNHS website and you will see a tab called Report a Tagged Bird, from where you can access the application.
Next question is from Sangyogita Verma. She asks that how tagging is done, means the actual procedure for tagging.
So what we have out here in India specifically is we have a team of ringers, scientists, researchers, and bird trappers. So we also have a team of professional bird trappers who trap birds for us. We have different kinds of nets for different. So for a water bird, we'll have nooses or mesh nets, which is similar to a fishing net, but much more thinner and delicate net with which we trap a bird and then we get it to the ringing site, which is usually around 100 to 200 meters from the trapping site, and we ring the bird, we take all the measurements, and all of this has to be done very quickly. So you cannot really retain a bird for hours. You have to process the bird with all of its rings and measurements and data and release it as soon as possible. We hold the bird for less than a minute. So that's how it happens. And then we release it back to where we trapped it from.
Okay. Aparna Rao asks that you said that it should not, sorry, you talked about molting and you said that it should not coincide with two activities, that is with the breeding period and what the other period you had mentioned.
That is when it's actively migrating. So when it is flying from one place to another, it cannot have lost its flying feathers. So it cannot molt when it is actively migrating. It can molt during its wintering site or during that small duration after it is done breeding and yet to start migrating, or it has to finish its molt quickly at a stopover site where it's stopping for a short duration during its migratory journey.
Okay, next is from Siddharth. He asks that what happens when the migratory bird is preyed upon by a predator, especially when devices are attached?
Oh, that happens. So a lot of cases where birds are predated because that's how naturally they are predated in the ecology. But we rarely get our devices back, so you lose out on the data.
Okay, next is from Varsha. She asks that why some species of birds are tagged on the neck.
We do not tag birds which would cause hindrance again. For a goose, the neck is very long, and if we also ring the bird on its leg, but because it's in water, most of the time we're not going to be seeing the ring at all. So that's why a neck collaring method has started for geese. It might look like it's tight, but they have a thick coat of feathers, so it is not a very tight neck collar. It's a pretty loose neck collar that we put on those birds, but it is used for certain species, like how wing tag is done for certain species. Or for ducks outside of India and Europe, they use nasal saddles because again, you ringing on their leg is not going to help you because the ring will be always underwater. So that's why different color tagging techniques are used.
Okay, next is from Abhishek. What percentage of the tagged birds are observed normally?
It depends basically on the site. So if it is a site that is frequented by bird watchers, then we get much higher sightings. So we get very good sightings from a site like Jamnagar, where there are a good set of bird watchers, or even from Chilika or Mumbai. But from sites which are far away or which are not frequented by bird watchers, the rate is less than 1% also. So it depends on the site.
Okay, Deep asks that which is the most challenging bird to tag?
I haven't tagged that one, but they say black stork is very difficult, or even pelicans are quite difficult. More so because they have an energy that you cannot contain. So those are the ones that are very difficult to tag. But other than that, I think a lot of other darters or even your egrets, they're quite nasty because they'll always aim for your eyes and they'll try hurting you. They'll try hurting your eyes. So you have to be quite careful on how you handle and hold birds also.
Okay. Next is from Mohit Patel. He asks that is birds facing any difficulties by the ring we applied on one leg?
No. So the ring is very lightweight. It's almost similar to us wearing a watch. So in each, for a certain species, we have noticed that they take a day or two to really get used to it. But after that, they do not see any discomfort. so it is not that heavy. And yeah, they seem to go about with their normal life. There have been records of birds caught almost like we have caught after 10-15 years also. But there are records of birds which were caught almost 60 to 70 years after ringing also, which were very normal. So no, bird ringing is one method which does not cause any disturbance to that bird.
Okay, next question is what about nocturnal flight call recording as a means to study migration at citizen level from birth?
You could do that. I mean, you could do that and report it again, but that is not something that we have been doing. That's a very interesting way to go about it. So you could understand if it is a passage bird or if it is a wintering bird, how you can understand the duration. So seasonality, you could understand when it arrives, how long it stays, or if it is a passage bird, through the call recordings, you could understand when it passed through your area. Nocturnal land birds still remain understudied in India, so there is quite a bit of scope for that.
Okay, next question is from Deep. He asks that do these rings affect their aerodynamics?
The rings do not. There are chances that a device might, if it is not placed properly, rings do not affect their aerodynamic capabilities.
Okay, next question is from Shashank Nagarle. He asks that, ma'am, if you want to run a tagging program to study birds from an important hotspot of the area, how can we move forward?
You will have to study bird ringing. Like I studied bird ringing for 3 years, after which I could handle a bird individually without any assistance. So you will need to study bird ringing. You will need to learn it under an expert because it's basically a bird's life is going to be in your hands. So we encourage you to get into bird ringing and study it for as long as you can, after which you can monitor the site whichever you want to.
Okay, next question is from Nagarajan. He asks that habitat disturbance is one get. What is noted due to the loss of habitat in Uran?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question? I think I lost
Yeah.
connectivity.
Yeah, habitat disturbance is one of the data we can get. What change is noted due to the loss of habitat in Uran?
We in fact have a team that's working specifically in the with the wetlands of Mumbai, and only in some time do we really understand. I mean, Uran was one site which used to support almost lakhs of shorebirds and good amount of birds, and losing that is going to affect them because they lose out a site. How do I put it? They lose out on a feeding site as well as a roosting site, and they will have to stray around, look for other sites, which will also pose a lot of threats on their energy usage. So that is going to be a concern. So they will lose out a lot of energy on looking for other sites because Uran was a site which was the most predictable and it gave a good habitat. So there are going to be energy related costs on the birds, but population wise, I'm not sure yet. We will take some time. So these are the studies that take 5 to 10 years to really understand the impact. So I'm hoping that the team that is studying on the wetlands of Mumbai will come up with some interesting results in those times.
Next question is from Piyush Chawla. He asks that does this various technique usage causes any kind of disturbance to birds, like radiation of devices used? Can you brief something about any kind of hindrance or disturbance due to migration study techniques used?
To the birds, to radiations, we do not have any justifiable studies that have told us that they cause any disturbance. So I don't think I can answer that question yet. So we do not have enough data that can suggest that these devices, I mean, not just on the size and location, but you're saying radiation. So we do not have enough information about that yet.
Next question is from Alok Ranjan Mohapatra. He is asking that what is the geographical factor for migration direction?
Geographical factor, I mean, if it's talking about navigation, it's something that I mentioned, that they use the location of sun, the position of sun, constellations, and odor map. And again, it is genetically imprinted also. So It's in their genes, so that's how they can navigate. If that is the question. If it's something else, I'm sorry.
Next question is from Mahesh Ramakrishnan. He asks that if a bird dies due to some unfortunate reason and they are consumed by raptors or other predators, won't the tags affect them?
I'm sure the birds will not consume the device, and I'm not sure about tags. So we've had cases where they've consumed rings, but it, they did not really seem to be affected. I mean, we only know about rings and we know that they do not affect birds, but we do not know about devices. Because devices, again, are a very recent study. We started studying these only in the recent times, so we do not have that level of data where because we hardly put any devices of which if a bird has really eaten a bird and what are the implications that it has seen. So we don't know about it yet.
Okay, next question is from Sumit Khatri. He asks that highest
Hello.
migration towards. Hello, please mute, sir. Suman Maharana, please mute yourself. Yes. Next question is from Suman Khatri. He asks that highest migration towards India is for which birds?
Highest, I mean, height wise or the number of species, number of individuals wise.
I think
mean-
maybe number of individuals. I think so. Highest migration towards India is for which birds? I think it's related to species.
It has to do with ducks. We get a lot of shorebirds that also cross India, but a lot of ducks that come, especially visions and garganis, the pintails and shovelers that come to India come in very large numbers, and you can see them all around from the wetlands in Punjab all the way down south to Tamil Nadu. So based on that, I'm sure it is one of these four ducks.
Okay, next question is from Akash Bhushan. He asks that have microchips been used to tag birds and eventually studying migration like it's done in reptile?
Uh, they have been, but there have been a lot of limitations for it. They've also tried making smaller devices and surgically embedding them in the bird's viscera, but there have been a lot of limitations with that. So, because then there are chances that if a bird does not heal on time, it affects their migratory pattern. So, I don't think we've really pursued it that far.
Okay, next, Shashank Nagarle is asking that what are the considerations made for a site to be a tagging station?
The population that's arriving there, first of all, if it's a site, then what numbers? Because you can barely trap 1 or 2% of the birds that are actually there. The species that are of concern. So if there are a lot of rock doves, we don't care. But if the species are of concern, the population is good. If the trappability is good. So trappability is a completely different consideration. It has nothing to do with just the numbers in the site. How accessible is the site? The habitat conditions, the site conditions, if our trappers can actually trap a certain set of birds at that site. So those are the three major considerations that we have while selecting a site as a tagging site. So that was the condition for Chilika or even for Tamil Nadu, the Point Calamar site. The numbers were very high and it was mostly extensive mud flats, or even for Chilika, we majorly do it in Nalabana, where you have a lot of mud flats where you can trap the birds safely. So there are other techniques where you can simply just capture birds, but then you have to make sure that they have to be done in a very safe manner. So these are the three considerations that we have for the trappability of the site.
Next question is from Ankit Khoche. He asks that how can we capture birds for ringing?
With the help, the most common land bird trapping method is using mist net. So you can just Google mist net, MIST net, and that's the standard method that's used all over the world. But you need to be a licensed stringer and you need to have forest department permission. That's another thing that I need to specify. You cannot go and ring by yourself. You need to have special permits or permissions from the forest department stating that you can do so. For others, every species needs a different technique that you need to trap it. So like flamingos or certain ducks or even goose require nooses, which are like snares, but a double loop one because then it becomes safer. So that's the case for waders. We have mesh nets, then there are clap traps. So based on the species that you want to trap, there are different techniques that you have with which you can trap the birds. But if it's something that is an entry level and you have the permit for it, then I think mesh net, the mist net that you can use is the most safest one.
Okay. Next is from Mangesh Shamle. He asks that if I wish to trace the feeding as well as breeding range of a locally moving bird like egrets, then without using all these techniques, how can I do that? I mean, which methodology should I follow?
I think using color bands on its legs would be the most ideal. You can keep a track, or like I mentioned, a VHF transmitter. If that's feasible, you do not need as many permissions as you do for other satellite related devices. So you can just place that VHF transmitter on a leg band also. Just place it on the leg, and with the help of antenna, you can keep checking how the bird is moving within its home range and territory is something that you can very easily study with the help of a leg band and a VHF transmitter.
Next is from Mohak Bhatnagar. He asks that are there chances of a bird coming for migration to our country bring about any disease that may affect the birds of our country and affect their population? I think.
Yes, there are. Of course, there are. I mean, that's exactly why we study avian diseases. And in fact, the interesting thing is when a lot of finances come in for migration studies is during outbreaks of diseases, because that is when we desperately need to understand how the birds are moving and which are the birds which are bringing in the diseases. So we can understand. So we have avian influenza study specialists, and there are labs in Bhopal where you can send your samples from where you can understand which are the birds which are bringing in diseases. It's a very important field of migration study that's there in India.
Yeah, next is from Anil Kumar Mishra. He asks that are mobile towers affecting the path of migratory birds?
Mobile towers, I'm not very sure of, because again, there is no data that directly suggests that mobile towers are, but electricity towers or transmission lines have been known to cause mortalities of certain birds.
Okay, Sanjeev Chaudhary asks that bar-tailed godwits, are they seen in India?
Yes, they are. I mean, they are frequently seen along, because it's a Maharashtra and Orissa collaborative event. They're commonly seen on both the coasts. I mean, more so on Orissa coast than Maharashtra, but they are very commonly seen along the coast of India.
Yeah, next is from Mr. Devananda Panda. He asks that when the birds are migrating across the oceans, where do they take rest?
So when I spoke about a bar-tailed godwit, that is a species that travels non-stop. I mean, stopping anywhere in the ocean is very risky for a bird. Then when I mentioned something like an Arctic tern, those are the species that actually feed on the sea. So they don't really they don't really stop and take rest. They just keep flying and feeding. So they keep getting their energy again and they keep flying. At times they have an ability to lock their feathers in a certain way that they're not spending so much energy. So with the wind currents, they just keep flying. And there are small islands in the middle where they stop and do take rest for shorter durations. But that's about it.
Okay, Kiran Ingle is asking that any specific technology for easy counting nocturnal bird?
Easy counting of turn of turn, not that I'm aware of. I'm very sorry.
Dr. Nabakumar Patnaik is asking that how many times a bird migrated in a particular place or other place?
How many times? I mean, in Indian context, we've gotten recaptures from Tamil Nadu, where birds keep coming every year or every 2 years back to the same site again and again. Even for bar-headed goose, we continuously keep getting resightings from places like from wetlands in Karnataka or even from Orissa, where birds keep coming back to the same sites every year. So that is the site fidelity that they're showing. It's a very common phenomenon. Other than that, overall, we know of places like especially breeding sites or islands where birds keep coming there at the same site for almost 60 years or 70 years. So that is the records that we have globally. But for India, we have records for 10 to 15 years also, where birds keep returning to the same wintering sites.
Okay. Next is from Pranav Prabhu. He asks that has there been any case where a tagged bird acted differently, like migrated to a different area or taken a different route? What can be a reason if any of these happen?
Hmm. So the thing is, when a bird, I mean, from the available data, if we record a bird at a certain place, I mean, from a bird tag, let's say in Orissa, was recorded in Kazakhstan, we have very little information otherwise to know if this was the normal route or if it was an abnormal route that it took. For us, the consideration is considering that we have very safely tagged the bird and given it a tag that does not cause a lot of hindrance. We just consider that the route that it took was a normal one. With devices, there have been cases that birds have wavered away from their actual route, but that's also because the device is a much heavier device. I mean, it's almost 2 to 3% of their body weight. With rings and tags, these are practically weightless rings. So we don't really know that the routes that they take, if they are deviated routes or the normal routes. So what we get is what we consider a normal route itself.
Okay. Next is from Radheshyam Yogi. He's asking that the migration path or the adaptation according to migration path is genetic. If it is genetic, then how?
Yes, there is a plausible evidence which shows that the migration route is embedded in their genes. So for the longest time, this was predicted, but nobody was able to justify how that could happen. Like how could a bird have an entire route in the genes? But when you start studying species like cuckoos, so we know the most interesting thing about cuckoos is their brood parasite. So they do not raise their own chicks. They lay eggs in other birds' nests. It's that other bird that really raises that bird. So when when the first year bird or the bird that just fledges out of the nest, when it starts migrating, it does not migrate with its parents. It migrates on its own. Even then, it uses the same migratory route as an adult does. So based on similar such studies, were we able to understand that along with other navigation techniques, the route was actually genetically embedded also.
Okay. Next is from Vivek Vishwas Joshi. He's asking that we have a hearsay that once bird is touched by human, then other birds trouble that bird. How true it is, and if it is true, then does such ringed birds get trouble?
No, that when we say that in a very different aspect. We usually talk about nesting birds, where if we say that a chick is touched, usually it does not get accepted by the parents. But there are a lot of other theories that have been placed about how there are chances that the chick would actually have been rejected by the parents because they wanted to prefer another healthier chick to it. And that's another part of the study altogether, but we have not seen in case of our tag birds. In fact, we've seen that a lot of our tag birds from a certain flock uh, keep traveling, moving about, and spending the entire time within the same flock itself, and the flock does not really seem to affect them at all. And we see them in the next year and the years after that also. So that is not the case that we have encountered.
Yes. Next is from Ravi Vinay Mishra. He's asking that if I found a wild Indian ring-necked thread or any other wild animal prohibited to keep as pets under Wildlife
Hmm.
Protection Act, where should I
Hmm.
contact or inform this thing? As I've seen many trades and some people keep them as pets.
Oh, I think Forest Department would be I mean, there's Traffic India that's specifically working on it. Traffic India is an organization. But otherwise, I think you can inform Forest Department if there are cases of wild bird trade. That's all I can say.
Okay, next is from Rajesh Sharma. He's asking that how do migratory birds help us humans, or on the flip side, negatively affect us?
Uh, a lot of the study from migratory birds based on the energy usage, aerodynamics has actually been applied in different engineering techniques also. I mean, how a certain gram of fat can be synthesized to give the maximum kind of energy, or how the shape of the birds. So let's say a lot of birds migrate, but even then the shape of their wings are different. So you will have a swift that is certainly shaped. There'll be a pelican that has a completely different shape, a raptor that's very different in shape altogether. That's because they have very different requirements of their body shape while it's migrating. Some are soaring, some are swifter birds. So based on that, also we've taken a lot of our understanding of how we design our aerodynamically uh, aerodynamically needed machines. Apart from that, if you're talking about ecology and habitat, a lot of pollination or uh, weedicides are migratory birds. So when you have to keep a certain insects in check at a certain place, they're usually done by large swarms of migratory birds that are there at a certain site. Same is the case with pollination also. How are they negatively affecting us is something that I'm not sure of. I mean, that's not something that I'm aware of, so I'll not attempt answering that.
Okay, next question is from Suman Maharan again, that what if I photographed a bird with ring or tag? Is it necessary to upload it anywhere or site?
Yes, you can send it to us at, like I mentioned, you can go to the BNHS website and report that tag bird. It will be really, really helpful for the scientists who studying migration to get information on that resighting, because that tells us again about the seasonality, about the location. If it is tagged in another place, we really understand that the connectivity between those two sites. So you can go to the tag birds tab and you can send in the information. We will get back to you with the ringing information of that bird. So we will tell you when it was ringed, if it was ringed as an adult or a juvenile, or if there's any other interesting information about that bird that we've gotten so far. So that's how you go about it.
Okay, next is from Siddharth. He's asking that will color tagging on birds affect their camouflage, considering that many birds blend with the background?
We don't do it for birds that can be easily predated that way. So another concern for us was of using a neck collar on the bar-headed goose for the predation, but that has not been the side of India. There have been cases where a certain set of land birds were predated, and if you see, I mean, it's a very dynamic study. So if any such case comes in, that study stops. So if we see that because of a color tag, the bird was more easily visible, and that's when we stop that using that technique, because understanding migration is one thing, but we do not want to affect the life of that individual just because we're using a tag. So if there are certain cases like that, then we stop using that technique.
Okay, next is from Sri Danish Kumar. He's asking that what is the maximum weight of the device which can be attached to a bird?
Device along with the attachment. So if it is a Teflon ribbon that you have to put, if it's a wire, everything together, 5% of the bird's body weight. That is the maximum weight you can attach on that bird.
Okay, Rasmi Shetty is asking that is the color of band that we will ring the different birds is same for all types of birds?
Are you asking if the same ring is used for all the birds?
I think so. Is the color of band that we will ring the different birds? Yeah, the color of the ring should be different. Should be same for all the different types of birds which is being ringed.
So for shorebirds, like I mentioned, we have a protocol that we have to follow. So double white for northern India, single black for southern India. So that's what we follow for all shorebirds. All of them get those only two combinations. For
Okay.
a certain species, we have like for bar-headed goose, we have a red neck collar. For greater and lesser flamingos, we have yellow band. So there are color assigned for groups of birds, and we have to keep with them. But different individuals do not get different colors. So if we're tagging two different flamingos, we don't give them two different colors. They still get the same color. The alphanumeric code on that will be different.
Next is from Dr. Sandhya Ved. She asks that can we have weather forecasts from birds' migration data and predict about their breeding?
Weather forecast, pelagic birds, birds which spend most of their life at sea, get a better indication of harsher weather, cyclones, or such harsh weather conditions, and they usually take to land. So that is a cue that we can take when we see landing of a lot of shorebirds. That's when you understand that the weather is very harsh, but you cannot really forecast a weather or understand climate change based on their occurrence at a certain place.
Okay, now I'm gonna ask the last question because there are so many questions and time is running out. That from Kalyan Rao Salunke, that could you please tell about the small groups of migratory bird, those left behind during migration by some reason? Are they seen rejoined with the original group?
So if a small set of birds are left behind, there could be two chances. One is in certain species, juveniles do not migrate back. So if it is a first year bird, it has hatched only in that year, it is sexually not mature to breed. And in that case, it spends its winter at it spends the summer at the wintering site itself, because the entire migratory journey is a very stressful process, and there are a lot of disturbances, a lot of threats involved in that process. So it will choose not to go back to its breeding site and it will stay at the wintering site. That is one case. Other cases, if a bird has stayed back because it was not able to put on enough weight, put on enough fat reserve to initiate its migratory journey, then there are chances that the bird will just stay back at the wintering site, because then there is no chance that it can complete its journey with the existing weight. And that's also an indication that the habitat has not given it good enough food condition. Uh, Birds can migrate a little late, but they avoid doing so because, like I mentioned, they use a lot of stopovers during the migratory journey. Uh, their phenology is conditioned such, or their occurrence at those sites is conditioned such that those sites offer good food reserves during those certain times itself. So if a bird is late, there are chances that it may not get its food reserves, especially if it is a frugivorous bird, or yeah. So there are chances that a bird may not go back to the same flock in the migratory journey if it stays back. So there are chances that the bird will either stay back at some other site or not complete its migration at all.
Okay, thank you so much, Tuina. And dear participants, I believe that the time is up for today's session. I know a lot of unanswered questions are still waiting in the chat room. So on this note, I request Tuina to provide with a contact or an email ID to our participants where they can mail you their queries.
So I will just put the two email IDs in the chat box right now. If you have any queries regarding the bands resightings, then you can write to us at bands and at bnhs.org. I've put that in the chat box. And if you have any specific information about the logistics or a certain study, you can write to me at t.katti@bnhs.org. I've put that in the chat box also. So these are the two email addresses you can contact us on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Participants, you will be finding those email IDs in the chat box, and many of you are asking that whether you will be getting these recordings of these webinars. So yeah, you will be getting after a few weeks. All these recordings will be uploaded on the BNHS NVIS website, and so On behalf of all the team members of BNHS Enways, which comprise of Mr. Nandkishore Dubey, the Program Officer, myself, Sushmita Karmakar, the Information Officer, Mr. Suraj Gosavi, the IT Officer, and Mr. Viraj Atle, the Data Entry Operator, and all the team members of CES Enways, which is headed by Mr. Prabhat Mohan Dash. I thank you all for joining us today. We hope you found this information and dialogue valuable in supporting a noble cause, which will aid in the further conservation and preservation of our planet. I thank all the team members of BNHS, Enways, and CES Enways who have jointly come forward to conduct this informative session. I would again thank Ms. Tuhina Katti for gracing this event with her expertise. So, on an ending note, I wish you all a very good night. Thank you.
Hello.